Okay, so inside of this house, the attic is completely covered in mold. That would be the plywood decking underneath of the roof as well as the rafters. So the reason that that's happening is there is not, well, there's two reasons. One, so if I point out here, if you look at the ridge vent along the top, it's completely collapsed. So when they put this ridge vent on years ago, they probably didn't use the right code for Michigan. And if you don't have one that's going to hold up against a snow load, that is a common occurrence. And you can see kind of along my finger where it's got a wave to it. That means probably snow load or whatever sat on there and has crushed it down and it's not allowing it to breathe. That's your exhaust. The problem is this house doesn't have good enough intake ventilation. So even if it had a full ridge vent, I'm gonna say that it probably would have had this problem anyway. And you can see like under here along the entire porch section, there are no vents. So in order for your house to perform correctly, you have to have airflow that comes in here right underneath the what we call either the soffit. So like along the garage here, you can see back probably in the 70s when they did this, or 80s when they did this aluminum soffit, there is, you know, some grates here, but and that's kind of the story around the house. However, that's simply not enough in order to ventilate. You have to have balanced airflow. So ideally that air will come in down here at the soffit. You can see there's one kind of cheese grater under there. I'm not sure if you can see it or not. And that will push the hot and warm air out the top if everything works well. The problem with this house is it has a couple design errors or flaws that are kind of limiting that. So number one, like I said, this porch here, there's no intake ventilation at all, okay? I'm gonna assume that this roof's probably, just looking at the shingles, you can see some granular loss and some streaking in the shingle mat. I'm gonna tell you this roof's probably around 15 years old, just looking at it. And you know, the other problem with not having ventilation is it does cause these shingles to prematurely wear out, because if you don't have proper airflow coming in, so cool fresh air down at the bottom to push it out of the top, even if this ridge vent was functional, these shingles are going to overheat. Any good roofing manufacturer, or all roofing manufacturers, have pretty stringent standards on how their ventilation is done so that the shingle can hold up to it, so the attic's not getting in excess of 150 degrees in the summertime, which a lot of times they are. And then, yeah, again, you can see this is completely collapsed. Along here, it's the wrong kind of ridge vent. And then lots of heavy streaking and dark algae growth over here. Again, that's caused by not having proper ventilation. And then this plywood in a lot of spots is delaminating. So the challenge with this roof is, even if it had soffit vents, you only really have that front area. If we can open that up and even pull the insulation back in the attic, that's not going to be enough to ventilate, say, this whole area, because you're looking at another 20-25 feet or so, and there's no way to get enough airflow into both this roof and this roof without adding extra intake ventilation, either through the roof system itself. The soffit is limited, so it's going to have to be added through the roof system itself, and I'll talk more about that later. On the back, kind of the same story. When I was in the attic, I didn't see proper baffling all the way through, so that's something I'm going to look at as well. But you have to have airflow coming in from underneath that gutter all the way up, and for this to be ideal, it needs to be open all the way across, okay? In the back in the day when they built these houses, it'd be like 6 to 8 feet. That's not enough. So this roof definitely needs more ventilation, and I believe that's probably why I'm feeling so much spongy plywood too. It's not only covered with mold on the bottom, but it's also, like I said, delaminating. That's where the glue in the plywood comes apart from heat over years, and you can just feel it when you're walking on it. That's what makes it spongy. I just want to show this here again, because there's definitely not, you know, you may see some soffit vents. This has them, hard to see in the video, but probably once every 8 feet or so. And they're the old style, which is like an old cheese grater, meaning they're mostly clogged up. So I could put the baffles in on the inside, but it's not going to get you any airflow, and it's definitely not going to get you the airflow up to what you need. So your choices are either change out the soffit or add in a roof system that has ventilation built into it, which I like better, because then we're not dealing with the what ifs of, is the ventilation getting in the attic? This would guarantee that the attic is going to be properly ventilated, meaning it's going to eliminate the problem of having fungal growth or excess moisture in the attic, and the shingles will last a lot longer than what they would normally.
Well, you can see this one's got fungal growth all the way down. Big splotch of it there, colony, right? So the problem with this attic is a couple things. One, your attic needs to breathe. And if you look down along the eave here, that's actually a reverse gable. The problem with that is you're not getting the airflow into the attic for the intake. And then all along the front there, that's where the porch is. You can see there's no baffles, no ventilation, no intake at all, which, no surprise, is what's led to this fungal growth. Along the back, there are a few baffles here and there, although they don't look like they're doing much. So you have no intake on the back. And you can see that the plywood is completely covered and it's spongy on the top. As well as that roof ridge is not wide enough, and then it's also collapsed on top of that. So this attic hasn't been breathing. The other problem is it needs at least another 6 to 8 inches of insulation blown in over top to be up to code. That causes problems with moisture as well, because if you don't have enough insulation, and in this case you can see here, you got a 2x4, so that's about 3.5 inches, and then you're basically into drywall. So you got about 7 inches of insulation. Well, that's just not enough. You got to keep the heat in the house during the wintertime. If you don't have the heat in the house during the wintertime, it's going to come up and it's going to hit the nails. And you can see how that one's rusty. That heat hits those nails and it causes, because those nails are cold from outside air, and then they start to sweat. That produces the moisture, which will cause the mold when it stays in here and it's not ventilated. So my recommendation on this house, because the plywood is so spongy and because it's completely covered just about all the way through the attic, I believe the house portion needs a new roof, new ventilation, and new plywood. And then this attic needs to be remediated, as well as added insulation in here and proper ventilation.
So I get asked all the time, why would my attic be full of mold? The house is 50 years old. We've never had that problem before. And it's a great question. If the roof is not designed correctly from the last install, that can actually cause more problems than what you currently have. Meaning, if they don't get the ventilation correct, both intake ventilation coming through the soffits, which is underneath your gutter, and exhaust, which is your ridge vent, in this case it's completely collapsed and the hole's too small, which are two things that could have been easily avoided had the contractor used the proper ridge vent and cut a bigger hole, as well as added intake ventilation. We wouldn't be having this problem with the mold in this attic. So if your house right now has a problem with mold, chances are in the attic, chances are the roof's not ventilated correctly or you have lack of ventilation. Just to put a cherry on top of what causes mold in an attic, this is the garage of the same house. You can see we're not conditioning the space below. There's a big garage door, so it has plenty of ventilation, so there's no fungal growth even with the collapsed ridge. The garage is doing much better because it's not a conditioned space.